Good evening for all our Canadian, Australian colleagues and peers. So tonight, I am so looking forward to have the update that we'll be getting from our Peace Australian Club about the impact of our global grant that the Rotary Club of Woodstock, Oxford took the lead on and what we use it for. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to our chairman, Doug Vincent. He will take over this meeting and then we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, President John, and welcome to all of our Australian friends and also other friends who are joining us from some of the other sponsoring clubs who've supported this project. And I think we're going to be really pleased with the report that we get from our Aussie friends. And thank you so much for all of those who have shown up from District 9820. And I also want to acknowledge that just in the last moment or two, past District Governor Kathy Dick and Timothy have joined us. So thank you so much, Gov, for joining us. And we have two past district governors also from Australia. One is the coordinator that we've worked with, Jane, and she's going to talk to us in a moment. So one of the things I'm going to do is share a very short video which will kind of explain how this project came about. And then I will turn things over to Jane for the reporting part of it. So just bear with me for a moment and we'll play this short video.
In 2019, many of us heard about the disastrous bushfires that impacted Australia. Rotary Australia World Community Service appealed for help from Rotarians around the world. In District 7080, Rotary Club of Mississauga West, led by Betty Jo Perron, appealed to clubs to consider donating funds to Australia Rotarian relief efforts. What started off as a small ask became a global project. East Gippsland in Victoria was one of the hardest hit areas in Australia. Through a community needs assessment, the Rotary Club in Australia identified where funds were needed to help improve farming methods, to better deal with drought conditions and ongoing mental health support for families most devastated by the fires. Led by the expertise of past District Governor Doug Vincent and the Woodstock Oxford Rotary Club, the original $11,340 US that was collected by District 7080 clubs ended up becoming a project of $95,190 US. This was through district designated funds, funds from Australian clubs, and the Rotary World Fund. Educate. To learn more about the Rotary Foundation, visit the district website or speak to your club's foundation chair. Support the Rotary Foundation, which has a 4-star rating on Charity Navigator, and donate to the Rotary Foundation Annual Fund today.
So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And without further delay, I'm going to turn the program over to past District Governor Jane, who is the lead of the committee in Australia, and we have a lot of Australian participants as well, and some of those are going to share some comments as well. So I'll leave it to Jane to introduce them. So Jane, if you'd like to take over from here, that'll be great.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us this morning, tonight, whatever. It's been an absolutely incredible experience to be part of this global grant with you. And yes, there will be a few of us. I'm going to do about 10 minutes, and then much to the delight of past Rotary International President Ian Risley, who sends his apologies and greetings that he can't be here today. He wonders how on earth I'm going to keep past district governors down to sort of 2 minutes, but we're going to just to manage it. But I'd like to firstly thank everyone who's been part of this, and particularly Betty Jo and Doug and Norm for the incredible amount of work that's been done to enable us to get this global grant up and running. And the whole East Gippsland community is incredibly grateful for the support that you have shown to us. And hopefully this report today can give you some idea of what you've been involved in And we certainly look forward to Melbourne 2023, when hopefully some of you after the event or before will be able to come up to East Gippsland and meet some of those who've been so impacted. I'd like very briefly now to introduce some special guests. Past President Mark Stevens from the Rotary Club of Brighton North, who will be making a couple of comments. Mark is from District 9800. Pearl Finlay-James is a past president, and she's been the chair for the last 18 months of the East Gippsland Rotary Fire Aid Committee and done an incredible job. Past District Governor and now District Rotary Foundation Chair, Mark Humphreys, who's in disguise. Past District Governor Tony Spring, who has been an incredible mentor to me over many years and was my governor when I was president. Past District Governor Adrian Froggatt, who is now our Emergency Management Chair. And very special greetings to Dr. Alison Gunn, who's our training advisor and who's managed to get through all her vet work yesterday to be able to join us this morning. So thank you so much, Alison, for doing that. Rotary District 9820 covers a fair bit of Victoria, including, for those who've been to Victoria, the Mornington Peninsula, Greater Dandenong, Casey, Cardinia, and all of Gippsland. So if you could go to that next slide, please, Doug. So basically, the blue area, the big yellow is all of Victoria. The blue area is our part of Victoria. And basically from about halfway along our length, right through to the straight line, thank you for that, Doug, which is the New South Wales border. We spent probably from October 19 to February 2020 with that whole area in flames. But the main loss of life, homes, sheds, fencing, stock, native animals, trees, everything, was basically predominantly the week between Christmas and New Year. And so on the 1st of January, our then Assistant Governor in East Gippsland suggested that we get a committee together because this was going to need some very hard work. Adrian, as the incumbent governor, and I went up to that meeting. The committee was formed under Pearl on that day, and fortunately, well, unfortunately, the area had been in drought for about 3 years. One of our Bairnsdale clubs had been coordinating that drought relief for the district. And so when the fires went through, affecting mostly the same people, Pearl and the group were able to draw on the expertise and the contacts that these drought workers already had. So that's been absolutely wonderful. Next slide, please, Doug. Now, one of the main parts of the global grant that you guys have been involved in was feed, because obviously cattle and sheep had been on drought-stricken land. They've now been through fires. There's basically nothing there and they're pretty traumatised. Well, I want to actually concentrate on that silage truck. It's one of the biggest I've ever seen, and I live next door to a major dairy farm that's part of the family. But there are 64 bales of silage on that truck. Basically what that would do, and I'm really on my mettle now that I know I've got Alison here, most of the cattle up there would probably take about 10 kilograms a day of that hay, silage. And so even though you've got 64 bales on there, if you give 5 or 10 bales to a whole lot of different farmers, that hay, the silage is not going to last very long. Hence, we would see 13 and 14 bale trucks, 13 and 14 convoys of trailers going up to East Gippsland with necessary hay and silage. So it's been a huge ask over a number of years in terms of trying to keep cattle alive, and a lot of farmers even now are not able to take advantage of good prices for calves and so on because they haven't got the cattle to actually do a huge amount of breeding. They're just trying to restock. So it's been an ongoing problem. Thank you, Doug. Now, this probably is one of the most fantastic parts of the whole program. Originally, we went in with the farmer's request for the fodder I've just shown you, but earlier this year, the farmers requested that we actually tweak the program. They'd had drought-breaking rains. They wanted to tweak the program so that they could actually use weed spray, fertiliser, and then plant appropriate seed in their own, a particular paddock, which would start to get them back feeling a bit more independent and get them going again without relying on the generosity of others. And so Tony and I went to our own Stephen Sundstrom in Evanston, who's our zone's global grant expert. Stephen was very happy within the bounds of the original budget to tweak it to this new area, and some 43 farmers were able to take advantage of that, and it's been an absolute boon. Thank you. Doug, please. Now, I was very fortunate in November last year to be able to go up and spend some time on farm with a number of our farmers who had been impacted by both the drought and the fires. Now, we are standing in a paddock, so you can see that there are tufts of green, but it's still not looking all that wonderful. You couldn't put stock on there. But Doug is pointing to the gentleman in the hat in the middle of the photo. I'm on his left. His wife is on his right. And the reason I'm pointing those two out is the fact that apart from the incredible privilege of meeting these farmers who've just been so much over the last 4 years, but even before that with fires and so on, one of the things was the very humbling acknowledgement that they were giving to what Rotary was doing. And a lot of that was due to the work of the local fire aid committee under Pearl, but also to what they had been receiving as part of the global grant. And it was a fantastic day and a very humbling day from my viewpoint, and as a Rotarian, generally to know how these people were feeling about us. So why I pointed Sandra and Bill out is that they have sent a statement. They couldn't be with us today, but they have sent a statement to let us all know what the global grant has meant to them. Sandra's been one of our main coordinators, and she's got a lot of the contacts for people needing assistance. But I've actually sent that letter through to Doug, and he's going to forward it on to people. I said to Pearl this morning, there's no way I would have even attempted to try and read any of it out, but it is an absolutely wonderful letter and a great recommendation for Rotary. Thank you, Doug. Oh, excuse me. This next slide is a letter and a photo of a group of farmers who weren't able to join us on that previous day. And they were absolutely excited because they were cutting hay and very excited about the fact. Doug, the next slide, please. And this is nearly the end, but what I wanted to do was to show you one of the things that Alison will talk about a little bit. This is our training programs, even though being farmers, we don't call them training. But the farmers have wanted to spend time on farm, looking at what they do well, what they could improve, how they could improve. And it's just absolutely been blown apart by COVID, obviously, but I think also Alison will attest to the fact that there's been a huge amount of exhaustion in these farmers over the last 18 months. And I think in one way, in a very strange way, the pandemic is possibly going to assist in allowing the farmers to take a breath and now be able to move forward when we can get these sessions going again. Doug, the last slide, please. The final breakdown of where we're at after 12 months. This is a progress report, but completed, you will see all the hay and silage, the high energy fodder, the paddock repair and planting assistance done. That side of the project is complete. The pasture sessions, the ladies' sessions with Gippsland Lakes Complete Health, and support sessions at neighbourhood houses and similar venues. Obviously, with COVID, we haven't been able to do that, even though regional Victoria has fared a little bit better than Melbourne. But we still haven't been able to have large groups or groups. So they are still to do. And obviously, we will get those finished as soon as we possibly can. That is all that is left to do on this grant, but it will be a very important part as we make sure that people are feeling okay about themselves, their homes and their families. But down the bottom is probably the most important part of the whole presentation. Thank you really doesn't seem enough in the circumstances we've been through. As a result of your generosity, lives and livelihoods are being rebuilt, and you've got no concept of just how important that is to these people, to know that it keeps coming back to these people are overseas and they care. And I keep saying to them, this is Rotary doing what Rotary does best. So from my viewpoint, thank you so much. And I'm now going to pass over. What I'm going to do, guys, is I will just announce who's going to speak and then I'll let you all just flow through. So Mark Stevens from 9800 will go first, followed by Mark Humphreys, followed by Pearl Finlay-James, followed by Alison Gunn, followed by Adrian Froggatt. And hopefully we're going to get all that through in about 10 minutes so that then there's time for you to ask questions. So thank you, and over to you, Mark Stevens.
Thanks, Jan. As a District Foundation Grants Chair, I was acutely aware of the value of foundation grants and have been involved in a number of global grants, principally in Cambodia and overseas. With the devastating fires in East Gippsland, I wanted to promote, as I said, the concept of global grants within Australia. And I believe that this will further promote our foundation as a charity of choice for individual Rotarians within Australia, and also promote the value of our foundation. And so I contacted Jan and said, why don't we do it? And I'd had some expertise in writing global grants, and we did it. And I'm happy to be a contributor, both in some senses, financially and also morally, and with hopefully my expertise in helping with global grants. I'll pass over to Mark Humphreys.
What I would like to start very, very quickly before I do anything is just show you a couple of images. So hopefully what you're seeing there is I decided to build a new home. And this is down on Bass Coast. And I'd quite literally taken possession of this, about 3 weeks before the fires started. The next image is I went to International Assembly in the January, and my parents decided they'll go and babysit the house for us. And my father went to that same window of where you just saw looking out outside, and that's what he saw. Then he took that photo. That is the smoke haze from the bushfires. And that there just shows you, if I move my mouse down here, where my mouse is, that's where that house is in Bass Coast. That's the fires. We were you know, 200-300 kilometres away from the fires, and that was the smoke haze that we were experiencing. So Jan invited me down. I finally got to do some DG visits. Normally you start those in July. I started my DG visits in November, and Jan took me out to the fire ground, and we started driving through the bush, and I thought, what's the big deal? The grass is green, the sky is blue, the trees are green, you know, they've got branches. It wasn't until you actually got out of the car and you started to look and see around. Yeah, the grass was there, but I tell you, it was thin grass. There was no substance to it. You go and look at the trees, and the trees are just black sticks. The green that's on them is the new growth. It's just showing Mother Nature at its best, you know, sort of 8-12 months later, the regrowth that Mother Nature is actually putting in. So Jan wasn't happy with just taking me out to there. The very next day, Jan and Pearl came and picked Linda and I up and said, righto, you're coming out onto one of the training days. And so we went out and we walked around some of the paddocks. And I tell you, you know, being, look, I won't say I'm city-based, but sort of a rural, semi-rural based sort of person, you know, traipsing over paddocks and all that was sort of nothing that I would do. We went onto this one particular paddock and all you just saw was barren ground. Nothing was growing on it. This is 10 months later. And then you go and you look at it and it's as hard as concrete. So it's not surprising nothing would actually grow. And then to see the energy and the effort and everything that the farmers had to do to start to rejuvenate these pastures was nothing short of phenomenal. It absolutely blew my mind, you know, and you don't just plant grass. It's, you know, you got to fertilize it. They had to rip it. They do drilling. Drilling to me is I go to the garage and get a cordless drill and drill a hole with a bit. That's nothing like what these guys have to do. Then they can start to sow the seed. Then they can start to grow the pasture of what they need. Then they can finally get the cattle on. And the costs and everything involved for doing that was just absolutely extraordinary. So for me to see the recovery of the natural bush is outstanding. The energy that the farmers had to do to rejuvenate the pastures so that they can get the cattle back on there and give them the feed that they need was nothing short of extraordinary. And the last little anecdote I'd like to give you, because it really applies to you guys as much as it does to me. Linda and I, we walked into a cafe, and Jan was there too. We walked into a cafe just to go and buy a cup of coffee and a good old vanilla slice or something to eat. And this was in Orbost, a town that didn't actually have the fires, but was completely cut off by the fires that surrounded. They were completely isolated. We walked in there. The lady behind the counter looked at me and said, "Thank you." And I thought, why are you thanking me? You're from Rotary. She wasn't thanking me, she was thanking you guys, because the work and the effort that you and me do has made an impact on that community. So I'll just say on her behalf, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, I have had the privilege, for the want of a better word, of steering the East Gippsland Rotary Fire Aid Committee for the last 20 months. When at its inception, the first day we sat down as a board and I said, everybody that's here, you have to have an understanding that we're going to be here for the next 18 months to 2 years. If you cannot commit to that, now's the time to put your hand up. Everybody stayed. We had no idea of what was ahead of us. It's just to say it's a disaster doesn't even cut it. So with you guys over there in Canada, and I have been blessed enough to visit your beautiful country, and it reminds me so much of Australia, but with the vastness. However, for us here in Australia, we had been dealing with drought to a large extent over 3 or 4 years. And now the fires, which just gobbled up the land. Your global grant and Jan, Adrian's, the DG's hard work freed me and my committee up to focus on other works within the community that was so devastated. We had 123 lost homes. And so these were families that were homeless. We had all of this impact. And in an isolated area of East Gippsland, that's huge. When the roads were closed, you couldn't access them. So thank you for all that you have done to help us. It may, from your perspective, you may think we've forgotten, but we certainly haven't. We're still going. And I'm lucky enough on the committee to have a retired vet. I know we have Alison here today, but the retired vet, Rob Barton, also gave advice on what cattle were needing, what feed, what licks, what everything. And we're going, well, we've got families here and we've got farmers over here. What are we going to do? And your grant allowed us to work both simultaneously. So we've had massive projects going through, and I'm just saying thank you to all of you. You're half a world away, and yet you thought of us and you contributed to us greatly. So thank you from Pearl and the Fire Aid Committee.
Alison.
I'm going to share screen. Okay. Hello, everybody, and nice to see people from all around the world. So I was approached by Jan to help deliver some of this education or training for the farmers. One thing I'll tell you from the beginning is that the farmers learn a lot better from farmers. So that was something we really wanted to incorporate into the training. And as has been addressed, you know, like a lot of the pasture had been destroyed. So the area we wanted to target was getting better pastures back on farm again, because there is a lot of things you can do to not get that right. But first of all, I just want to background a little bit more what the others were saying, and I just got a picture here from Google Maps of the fire area, and I just want to point out that basically we're talking about farmers up in these little tiny valleys here. So it's basically a really long district. It's like 4 hours from home to here, and the farmers are up in all these little tiny valleys. Sometimes you can't even see the green on the map, and so they had forest burning on either side of them, and they were really remote, really hard to get to get a great job that Rotary did getting all that fodder up there, and remote to even get delivery of any services from AgVic or anyone else. So one of the things, what we decided is we want to try and get information up into all those little valleys. So this farm here belongs to a guy called Brad Smith, who's been one of our champions of the project, and his wife Jen, and they are just real young farmers, community people doing a fabulous job. And they live in a little place called Tambo Crossing, which is this little gap in the hills here just north of Bairnsdale. They also have a couple of other properties, one a bit further south at Clifton Creek and another one in Sarsfield, and all three were burnt by the fire. So they had a massive, stressful job going on, but they're one of those people that just get on, get things done, and were in there fixing fences and spraying weeds pretty well as soon as the fire had gone through. And so what we did was work with Brad to actually talk about what was happening on his farm, because he did such a really positive job about getting his pastures reestablished. So this is a picture of his farm on the on the right, and you can see there's some pasture in the foreground that's quite rubbishy and got a lot of weeds, because with the drought before the fire there was a lot of hay brought in, so lots of people had weed problems anyhow, and then the bare patches created by the fire just exacerbated that further. So what we did is we had a couple of workshops, and this one actually started at Brad's place. And one of the big messages we want to get across is that if you don't control the weeds first, you get a really poor established perennial pasture. Putting a perennial pasture in costs a lot of money and quite a lot of time, and you want it to last for at least 10 to 20 years. And to do that, you've got to establish it right and then graze it right. And we want to really work with farmers to try and get best practice happening rather than just bunging in some seed and having a really poor outcome. So what Brad had done is the areas here on the farm are where he has actually put some crops in to try and allow better weed control and turning the soil prior to, and it didn't not necessarily turn in the soil, some of this just went in no-till, but to actually put crops in, and this is a brassica crop, so he can spray out all the other grass weeds before he actually plants. And then what he did is this little picture on the left is where he's actually fallowed, so he's actually basically had nothing in the soil for a couple of months before he planted his perennials to actually allow some moisture to build up in the soil. So we ran our first workshop at Brad's, and some of the Rotary guys showed up. And then what we did is we ran a workshop the next day, and you can see the fire burnt in the background. You can see that these trees are never going to recover from the fire. You can see how close. This is really typical. This is a farm that's a really long, narrow farm, and it basically every single paddock has got fire on the edge. This is some sort of river flats, but all that is left, it burnt so hot, is some weeds you can see in the foreground. So a lot of the discussions we were having with the farmers was not just what seed you put in, but which paddocks might survive and how to assess. So we're training them on how to assess whether a paddock could just be renourished with some fertilizer and some sprays, and or not necessarily sprays, some fertilizer and proper grazing, or whether it needed replanting. And this was one that needed replanting. So in the team here we have an agronomist who's hiding at the back, and we took Brad with us to talk about what happened on his farm, because he was just he's a really good advocate for best practice and getting out there and getting things sorted. And farmers learn really well from farmers. They want to hear other farmers' stories. And so this final picture here, so this is the paddock that was sprayed out, or one of the paddocks that was sprayed out when we were there. When was that, Jan? March. And so that Brad then went on to plant this paddock this year, and I was up there in about 3 weeks ago, and this is one of the paddocks he's planted. And you know, just look at the difference. It's just fabulous. He's got these beautiful little crimson clovers in there. He's got 2 or 3 species of grass. He's got like 4 different clovers, and he's already grazed it twice with significant numbers of stock. And we're using this paddock in a different project to actually like demonstrate to the district, if you put all the right steps, you can get a fantastic perennial pasture and it will last. And you know, trying to really extend this message that it's more than just about throwing some more seed in when you get a drop of rain. And yeah, I really would also like to say that the farmers have absolutely appreciated the Rotary input. And I remember I was in town the day that the first Rotary trucks came through with the hay, and everybody was cheering and screaming as they went through. It was just amazing. So thank you, everybody.
It was very well spoken, Mark, and you summarised certainly a lot of my thoughts very, very well. Look, when we first went down there, Jan mentioned we'd gone down on New Year's Day, just after the fires, and the worst of the fires and so on had been happening really in the week around Christmas to New Year, so there was lots of damage. I live in the Gippsland area, but not quite where the fires got to, thankfully. But it was just so shattering to get down into that part of the world and start having a bit of a look around. And the things that you really noticed, obviously first were the trees. All the trees were burnt. For, you know, thousands of acres of trees had been burnt. But it goes much more than that, because it actually burnt the pastures as well on the farms. And that's what really did the damage. They'd been coming through drought. They didn't have much feed. They'd been destocking their cattle breeding herds and that kind of thing because of the drought. And then the fire came through. And basically, as Alison was saying, it just turned what was left of the pasture into just weed infested rubbish. and there was no way they were going to recover easily from that. And this is where this project fitted in so well. One of the really big issues for the farmers after all this destocking and so on, we did eventually get some rain. The drought broke, as we heard, and there was, you know, water there to grow grass, but instead it was growing weeds. They still needed to be fed, and this is where that high nutrient feed came in that we were able to utilise some of this grant for. It was really important to get good nutrients into the breeding herds so they actually had a chance of conceiving to breed the next, you know, increase the breeding flocks again and get back to where the farms could be self-sustaining, we hoped. So, you know, don't underestimate just how important this part of the overall effort has been, and thank you so much to our friends, to Mark, of course, locally, and to everyone involved, to everybody in Canada who participated. Fantastic. I've got one picture I do want to share with you, and I'll see if I can get it to share. I won't say much more, but it was an absolutely striking photo that I took in one of Jan and my roams around the fire-damaged region of East Gippsland. And this photo was taken down in a place called Jannar, not very far from Malakuta, which was really at the far eastern end of East Gippsland. So I'll just share it now. Now, if any of you are fishing folk, I don't think they're going to be doing much more fishing in that boat. Now, the fire went right through this property. All the trees, when we got there, already starting to sprout a little bit of green out of the trunks and so on. But you can see the damage it did to this aluminium boat. It basically burnt it, burnt the trailer. The outboard motor is actually lying on the ground behind it, still attached to the transom, which has fallen off. It's really quite a striking photo. There's Jan up in the upper left of the corner there. She had to get in the photo. She's, you know, one of those bombers. But and my Land Rover up there, and the fellow that owned that property there, who's actually living in a caravan thing beside that tent. You can see his house was wiped out. He wasn't a farmer, but you can see how patchy the grass recovery is from where the fire went through. And that's exactly what Alison's talking about, exactly what we've been focusing on. So again, from me to all of you, thank you very much.
Thanks all, and thank you to your for your involvement, guys. I hope it's given you an overall picture. And Doug, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jan. I think at this point, we will go for questions or comments from our group. Go ahead, John.
I do have a question. So if we say from 1 to 100 on the recovery mode, what are we right now? Are we on the 60%, 70% level?
And Pearl, that's probably a better one for you in terms of general recovery phase.
Okay. In general recovery, there's still a long way to go because so many homes being lost, we're trying to rebuild. There's a short, COVID has jumped in and waved its hand at us as well, just to complicate issues. And so we have a shortage on building materials. We have only a certain amount of builders in this area, and they have to be registered. They can't come from interstate because they're not registered here. So the progress is quite slow in that regard. There have been tiny houses, there are caravans, which we within Rotary have donated to people that don't have houses. They were living in tents all of last winter through snow. So we're still maybe 60, 70% there. The professionals are now on the ground. We were first responders. Because we knew the area, and with Alison's map showing the little tiny hamlets, villages, difficulty accessing because of country roads. So it's a very, very slow process. As I said, professionals are in for the mental health, and so we have to stand back in that regard. However, we can refer people. So that's very important. So still a long way to go. Hopefully this coming season, we've had A very wet spring, which has seen a lot of growth. So we're not even contemplating what could happen in this summer coming. There isn't much left to burn anyway, as the regrowth is coming through. But I'd certainly say 60 to 70%. And another 2 to 3 years as people have to put their lives back. They've lost absolutely everything, from, you know, the bottle of vinegar they thought was in the pantry to where's the packet of mustard. They're things they've got to go and buy again. The tin opener, they've got to go and get all of this again. And so mentally, a long way to go. Physically, another 2 to 3 years. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for answering my question. We had talked about the devastation to the land and the farms. There wasn't very much about the devastation to the people themselves. And you've just answered my question. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What about the livestock? Not much was said about that.
Well, Alison may have a better answer. Livestock, millions and millions, native and farm animals were lost. It was terrible. It really was.
Alison?
There was certainly a lot of wildlife lost. On this side of the hills, we were actually quite lucky for livestock in that, because we knew it was coming generally, and because it was a drought, most people had some bare paddocks and were able to get their livestock into somewhere where there was a safe place. So considering the scale of the fires, the livestock losses were not too bad. There were some pretty sad cases where things like a helicopter water bombing had scared cattle out of their safe paddock into the trees, and then they'd all got killed. And there were definitely some people that did lose livestock where fire came in very rapidly. But for most people, they had their stock somewhere safe and were amazed at how many actually survived. But yeah, but the other side of the hills, so up in the northeast region, it came very quickly, and they had lots of grass and they had horrendous losses.
The fire was zigzagging across the countryside. So as the volunteers and the farmers were building fire breaks, and you thought you had it contained, the fire would zigzag off in another area, in another way, and then it'd turn around and come back. So nobody could actually predict in which direction this was going, because there were horrendous winds. And as you'll know also, that the fires create their own wind and storm pattern. So along with the high winds that were in this region at the time, it really was a catastrophe, because nobody could predict where the fire was going to spring up next. And when you're in a high bush, high holiday type area, then yes, the place was just one big fireball.
Okay, thank you for all of that, folks. Now I'll call on Peter Stam, please.
Yes, good evening again. And it is, without us being there, it's hard to imagine the scope of the disaster, what happened. 70 million hectares, that's 52 million acres. That's a big land base, a big land area, and it's just unimaginable unless you're right in it. And you know, my hat off for all the people there that did all the work, and especially you guys that were right in it. For us, it's easy to give, but it's another thing to do all the work and to coordinate it and to stay at it. Because this is, like you said before, this is not a half a year project. This is a project that will take 2 or 3 years. So thank you very, very much for everything you have done, and thank you for sharing the stories. And just want to also thank the clubs here in Canada, in Ontario, that participated and all worked hard to get the money together. And you know what an idea of one club of $1,000 can do, that can end up at $95,000 US. So that's amazing. So thank you all very much.